Great. Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to take you through some more about building your app. Last couple of times we went through sort of pre-design and design, and we're going to revisit that next time. And I'm going to, as was mentioned, I'm going to bring in Jake, who is our design director, and he's going to take you through some of the tools that you might want to use for that competition, but also you would use to sort of flesh out your idea. So we'll be doing that as we go forward. But this time I'm going to concentrate on a few areas. And this is primarily about building your app. So this is really almost post-competition. This is where does it go after. So looking at how your team, things around app security and GDPR, where is data coming from, how you manage a project, some QA and testing tips. In fact, we're going to have a little bit of QA test ourselves when we get onto that bit. Talk a little bit about technical specification. And assuming that we go through that at pace, but please do ask questions as we go. I'd much rather you ask the questions than sit there in silence. I also have an extra piece today on gamification and how that might be used in your applications. I think it's an important part of how you build engagement on an app, and it's something that you might want to incorporate. So, development process. So, having got our idea together, having built out that interactive prototype, we're now ready to build an application. To achieve that, we need first a more detailed technical specification. So we've had the design, we've had the outline, but we now need to build out some technical architecture. And this is where you really need to then start bringing in someone who is got technical capabilities. Now that might be somebody in-house, that might be a contractor, that might be a company that you partner with. And we go on to some why you might make some of those options in a moment. Typically, the way things are built today is that you work on planning out what are called development sprints, typically 2-week periods. And during that 2-week period, you set out to build a certain amount of functionality. And at the end of it, you're then able to test that functionality. And so you're building and testing as you go. Agile is a full process. We actually refer to using an agile methodology because we don't use the full agile process. That means that you'd be doing it all dynamically and working it out as you go. Well, not many people want to take it that far, but this, you're building it and you're working it out as you go, and therefore you're able to test every couple of weeks. Now that's really important to make sure things are progressing as you expect, because quite often if you were to give a project to somebody and they go away for 10, 12 weeks and bring it back, there'll be things in there that have gone wrong, not as expected, slight interpretations of what was in the specification that lead to it forking off quite away from where you'd like it to be. That regular review and testing allows you to make sure it's going right. It also allows you to make changes as you go that reflect perhaps business priorities changing. You're probably, if you're like any other startup, you'll be building the product at the same time as you're pitching it to potential clients. And if big client says, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if it also did X? You might well decide to make X happen inside the application so that it's more appealing to them, and so divert some resources. As I say, you're testing as you go, and that testing should be being done at a number of levels, and we'll come on to QA and testing in a bit. And then the final stage is to release your application. Now, as you get to the end of the build, you should be looking at what's called a user acceptance testing version of your application. And that's normally referred to by the techies as a UAT build. And that user acceptance testing version should be sort of 95, 97% finished and ready to go. But there'll be still some bits to finish off. You might be, waiting on T's and C's from the lawyers to insert. You might be waiting for a final design of some icon that you've asked for it to be redone, but the core product should work. Having done that and made sure it is working, then you'll get to the final build that's going to be released. And if it's an app, it's going to go into the App Store. If it's a web product, obviously goes online. And that will be a release candidate, an RC as it's called. So those two sets of initials, UAT and RC, refer to those two different latter stage releases. You should hopefully get release candidate 1 or maybe release candidate 2 out the door. If you are on release candidate 11, I would humbly suggest that release candidate 1 wasn't really ready, and that you perhaps needed to have done a bit more work. So at the end of this phase, you will have your full functional specification, which will be detailing above and beyond what was in the design. You'll have your developed solution, and really importantly, you'll have your source code. Because if you don't have your source code, you don't own your own product. So if you're having this built by somebody else, you need to make sure that you're getting access to that source code at appropriate moments. And I say as appropriate moments because we as a supplier, we don't provide source code to clients until they've paid. Bluntly, it's probably the only thing we have to hold over them at the end. So if they've got everything else, then they could disappear off and not pay the bills. If you're working with a developer who you're paying as they go, then they should be checking that code in, and you should have access to it all the time from the get-go. So typically you'll use something like GitHub or another code base storage platform, and they should be providing you with access, and you should be then making backups of that code so that you have access if they disappear. So if you're working with a fellow student, you want to be able to make sure that should they stop working on the project, you've got access to what they've developed so far. So one of the frequent questions that we get is, should I have a CTO in my company, a chief technology officer, or can they be external? Can they be someone who bring in to help support me? The honest answer is there's no right or wrong answer. However, my personal recommendation is to always have somebody inside your business that really owns the technology, that they understand exactly how your product works and understands translating, if you're not technical, your vision of what your product is into the technical delivery. That doesn't mean you have to do all the tech yourself. You might have that CTO, and you might have that very bright idea. And in fact, I came off a call only earlier today with a university startup, and they have an absolutely cracking idea that's come out of the physics department that they're trying to implement. But they're not going to build the app code around that. They don't need to have that skill. They can contract that in, and that's what we're talking to them about. So you need to decide, where does your smart bit need to finish, and where can you have somebody else build code around that? And if your idea is the smart thing, actually you might be able to outsource most of the build, because for example, if you had a new spin on a dating app, a way of doing it in COVID, then you wouldn't necessarily need to be able to build it yourself, but what you want to be able to do is own the idea and control that. Not have to worry about exactly how does a swipe up, swipe down work on a particular phone. So our recommendation: keep somebody within your team who's owning that technical relationship, whether it's yourself or a co-founder or someone you hire, but you can have most of it built outside. I think the way we think about it is, you need a lot of resource to build something. You don't actually need that much to maintain it. So you don't really want to hire all those people to then just have a low level of support and maintenance afterwards. Briefly mentioned technical specification earlier. So at the end of the design phase, what you've got is the wireframe, which is the engineering, the wire diagram of your application. You've got the user interface design, which is what it looks like, and you stitch those together to make an interactive prototype. But what it doesn't define is all the complex relationships in the data in the back end, exactly how is data stored, for how long, what architecture should be used. Is it going to be built in PHP? Is it going to be built in .NET, etc.? And that technical specification comes after you've worked out what it does. It's the equivalent, if we were making a recipe book, this is the equivalent of defining what the cover stock is made of. Does it have a fly jacket? How thick is the paper? How big is the book? Etc. So you don't need to do that till you know exactly what you're making, but you then need to define it before you start the build. Otherwise, you'll end up building it and then realizing you should have built something slightly different because you hadn't taken into consideration something. And typically the biggest issue is the data architecture in the back end, into how things integrate, how things fit together. And so that's where you do need someone with technical knowledge to build that. And it's actually quite a specialist skill in terms of system architecture, and particularly if it's a more complex product. So that's certainly something that you need to make sure you get right at the beginning of the build. And then from then on, you can then start building out the sprints that will deliver. One thing you definitely do need to consider as part of that architecture is app security and the handling of personal data. Almost every app has some aspect of personal data in it, some very personal. So if you've got anything in the healthcare space, etc., then you will have data that certainly somebody wouldn't necessarily want anybody else ever to see other than perhaps their doctor. But even if it's something lighter weight, maybe a simplest level, some sort of web browsing tool, something like that, you're going to have preference. You could be storing preferences, sites visited, data that would show who that person is. Now, I have to say, I have a 24-year-old son, and I think that generation are much more data aware about personal data and when they're giving it up than perhaps my generation were. I think, therefore, I think you're probably all more savvy on that front than perhaps some people that were even only maybe 10 years older. So you need to comply with the law. So the law is the GDPR laws, but you also need to make sure that your data is properly secure inside your application. Now, you need to make sure it's secure at an appropriate level, because bluntly, everything can be cracked. It's only a question of how big a lock you put on it. And that lock in itself is additional cost and additional time. So if all you're doing is a simple, I'll give an example of one I'm using at the moment, a weight tracking app, because it's the new year and I thought, try and lose a few pounds. So I'm doing weight tracking. It's storing that data, but actually, how secure does that need to be? Do I really care if someone gets it? I'd rather they didn't, but is it going to change anything? No. If it was access to obviously my bank account, that's a very different matter. So you need to make sure that that data is built into the technical specification. If you're integrating with other systems, you'll be using APIs to call data from other places. And you need to make sure those calls are secure, because that's actually one of the biggest areas of risk, is when your app is talking outside to a web server or to some other platform, and those need to be secure. And you will have seen on web browsers, you've seen HTTPS, which is the secure protocol, and there is an equivalent protocol for APIs that will allow you to make sure they're secure. But this is the sort of thing that you as owners of the idea just need to be asking the right questions of your developer to say, are you making my data secure? And you need to be thinking about what data is it going to need to store and where is it going to be stored. An example of that, where is it going to be stored? We had a product that we built for a mining maintenance company. And what they wanted was all of the data to be stored on an SD card in the device, rather than on the memory in the device. And that was because they envisaged, rightly, that down a mine, the device might get smashed. And what they wanted to be able to do was take the SD card out and plug it into another device and then unencrypt it and be able to pick up where the data left off. That's a very specific use case, but you need to think about what's relevant for you. Do I need to be able to transfer that data? When I've just got a new phone, so I spent 2 days making sure that apps had backed up and data had been uploaded to the cloud so that my data is now on my new device. So does your app need to be transferable? How will that data move across? Is it cloud? Is it automatic? Is it stored locally and you want Google to transfer it as part of the app backup that Google does on an Android device or iTunes on an Apple device? So it's really important that you think about how that data is held. But as well as that, you need to think about where the data is actually coming from. Hang on, let's see if I can get that right. Where the data is actually coming from. We often hear people say, oh, what we're going to do, we're going to have an app and it's going to be for food pricing. And what we're going to do is food comparison pricing and show data on where there's the cheapest place to buy stuff. It's a great idea. The only problem is, where's the data come from? Where is there a data source that gives me that information? And you need to think about, are you making that data source, or are you using somebody else's data source? And there's lots of data out there. Are you crowdsourcing the data? Are you asking your customers to put data in? And that's for all of the data in your app. You've got to ask yourself, where did that come from? Now, obviously, lots of it will be user generated, as in I will put my weight tracking app. I put the data in. It's really straightforward. For other applications, it might be coming from parts of the phone. So the data might be coming from the camera, the microphone, other sensors on the device, and being stored. A really common source of that data is Google. Google has a whole load of APIs. Mentioned earlier, APIs, protocols to send information to it backwards and forwards from an app that are available. The most common that you've probably come across is Google Maps, which is embedded into lots of other applications. And you use that within the app to give the navigation or to find stuff, etc. But they also have data on venues. So you can pull up a specific data feed around pubs and clubs, which is a subset of their businesses' data. You can pull up all sorts of other data and then combine it with other data sources. So you might say, well, we want to look at, we want to be able to list bars that are outside in places with good weather. So you're going to take those two data sources and mash them together to give your product, which is recommendations for where to go for an outdoor beer this weekend. Obviously, not available until May. Unfortunately. Those are the sorts of things, and that's how you need to go through and audit that data within your application and work out where it's coming from. And I think in terms of the competition, it's really important that you don't just say it does this. You need to indicate where it came from to show that it's been thought through, because that's a real gotcha when I've seen other competitions where people sort of magically have this wonderful solution, but it doesn't actually explain how that underlying data works. To make sure your project is well delivered, you need someone to be project managing it. In a small startup, that normally means you. If you're contracting in somebody else to build it, that would typically mean that they would appoint someone to project manage their team, and then you would liaise with that person. So it's really important you establish who is doing what, so that you can manage it going forward. QA and testing, so quality assurance and testing. This is the difference between when you've probably heard the expression a racehorse designed by committee is a camel. Yeah, so it's just badly put together. It's all the right ideas but badly put together. Well, QA stops your app being that camel and tries to make it into that racehorse, because it's making sure that it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do and doing it well. And that means the speed of execution, particularly how it looks, but also do all the error messages work, do all the things work, and do all the things work all the time. The typical process while building an app is that testing is first done by the developer in what's called unit testing. I write a piece of code, I check it does what it's supposed to do. I've checked that unit. That then builds out to part of an application. And then on those weekly sprints, there's something coming forward. And then somebody else, a QA, a QA engineer who is not coding the app, will then test the whole product to make sure it's delivering against that technical specification and that design specification. And they will be doing that at each step. And it's really important that it's not the coder doing it, because it's a bit like trying to spot spelling mistakes in your own work. It's really hard. And you need people who are really good at that. And they're not trying to pretend it works, that, you know, they're not trying to convince themselves that they've written it right. They're actually checking it against the specification. While it's being built, that's a really manual process. But once you've built your whole app, you can then automate the testing. So you can write scripts that will run tests time and time again. And that means when you're making minor changes to your application, that those minor changes you can test every aspect of it. Now that's something you can't do until it's fairly well formed and fairly stable. So it's something you typically do once you're at launch stage. But then once you're building out new functionality, you can then rerun those tests all the time. The great thing is that no longer do you have to go out and buy every single device that you could possibly think of to do all this testing. There are a number of cloud-based solutions that offer testing platforms. So Amazon Web Services has a thing called Device Cloud. Some manufacturers like Samsung have their own testing applications on their developer sites. You can obviously run multiple versions of Chrome, Safari, etc. on your local machines, and with the right tech, run different and older versions, because not everyone's going to be on the latest. And there are some specialist testing companies out there that will actually do nothing but this. One of the interesting areas is crowd testing. So this is the idea that you release a build to a company, and they then send it to a whole load of people like yourselves and ask them to test it. And they pay those people on an individual basis for feedback. And some of them quite interesting ones, they get the tester to talk while they're doing it, and it's video recorded. So you're getting live feedback as the person's clicking through. So you can get qualitative feedback as well as the quantitative feedback. Now I have to say there's a bit of a skill to QA testing. You have to have an eye for detail. And to that end, we have a Spot the Difference competition. And pre-warning Christian, I'd like to break us into, I don't know, sort of 4 or 5 groups, however we split down. And I will be putting in the chat a version of this that will make it easier for you to look at on your screens. Let me just get that up here. And what I'm looking for is for you to identify the differences. One is the build, and which is the build is on the right-hand side. And the original design is on the left-hand side. Sorry, so the left-hand side is design.
One quick comment. I think if we break out into breakout rooms, then the screen sharing will stop for those individual.
I know, that's why I need to put in the chat, which is what I'm just looking for. Is the chat available to me? Hang on.
Should be.
Yeah, where has it gone? Let's put it on the other screen. That's. Oh, I think I can't access it while I'm screen sharing. So let me stop screen sharing. And I'm going to drop into the chat a JPEG of the same 2 images. And right, let's just pull that round to this screen. Sorry, it's not as straightforward as it. Please stop minimizing. There we go. Why is that not letting me drop that in? Christian, if I email you this file, could you share it to everybody? Because it's
Yes.
not letting me send it. So that was just, bear with me a second, folks. Sorry, I think there were some questions in the chat there. Let me see if I can answer some of those while I get this across to Christian. When I'm doing the presentation, I can't actually see the chat, unfortunately.
But in the meantime as well, after I'm going to send it to you, I'm going to give everyone a heads up when I've sent it to you. If you haven't received it, do let me know, because the system that we use, it's not very pleasant. All of you should receive it ideally, but we'll see.
Right, let's have a look and see if I can go through these questions. Some questions about GDPR. Sorry, General Data Protection Regulations, I think is the acronym. Do you need to appoint a GDPR officer? You need to comply with local laws, and this is not legal advice. I mean, yeah, I think you probably need to nominate someone to be officially, I think like someone is the, in our company is the person delegated for the Information Commissioner's Office, but there are different rules. And as someone points out, there are different rules in different territories. So there's, in Germany, there's additional rules. California has its own rules. Even China is making its own rules around this. So it can get quite complicated. And it's one of the reasons why it's probably best to launch in one territory first, and then get to grips with that. Yes, you do need to contract with your suppliers to ensure that they are GDPR compliant. Typically, you need to say who's a data controller and who is a data processor. If you're just developing it and you're at the dummy data stage, then obviously you've got no personal data in there. So there is a question of at what point does your developer have access to any personal data? Typically, what you say is we'll have some dummy data or anonymized data for development purposes, and you just keep all the live data in the live environment, and you don't publish. You don't let developers have access to the live data. There's no, or very few of them to have access. The slides we will send through. And have you received the email? And Christian, are you able to post it in the chat?
Unfortunately, our version of Zoom doesn't allow us to upload documents.
Yes, it seems to let me link to Dropbox and things, but not.
But so one of the other questions, Paul, was about how long testing should go on for.
Ah, yes. Testing is, I mean, it's a slightly never-ending cycle. We allow for 25% of development time. For every 4 days of development, we allow for 1 day of testing. So it's that sort of order of magnitude. Let's see if this is working right. Right, I think I can upload it via my Dropbox. Let me just bear with me a second. I'm going to move this file. This is a workaround here. Has it come through on anybody's email?
So it should be coming through now to everyone that registered onto the third session. So that should be all of you. If not, you can just pass me your email privately in the chat, and then I'll send it then. But most of you should be receiving it now as we speak. Give it a few seconds. That's as a file. Yep, got it. Awesome. Someone posted characters, random characters. Okay. Yes, that's a yes. That's good. If anyone did not get it, do let me know. Again, just privately on that chat, privately, GDPR, send me the email and I'll send it over to you.
I think I managed to post
Fantastic,
it
yeah.
into
Awesome,
your
yeah.
chat. That was a
And
hack.
yeah, so Paul just invented an app, clearly, just for that.
So there you go. So you should now be able to, well, I've managed to upload it. I don't know if anybody else can access it. But if you click on that, you should get a file that's got the two images sort of zoomed in. And what I want to know in your groups is give you sort of, there are, let me just go back to my presentation. I can tell you how many that you're looking for. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, about 12 differences where things are not as they should be. So perhaps give you sort of 10 minutes to go through those and try and spot all of those. If everyone's finding that they've all done, just put something in the chat, then we'll know that everyone's done. And then what we'll do is we'll go around and we'll get each group to give us sort of 3 or 4, and then we'll move on to the next group.
Awesome. So I also covered the people who contacted me saying that they didn't get the picture, so that should be it. How many groups should we have, Paul? How many groups?
Let's say 4.
Cool, 4 groups. Awesome.
It'll obviously be hardest for the group we go with last, so they're going to have the less obvious ones.
So let's see. Let me just pull us out. Yeah, that's cool. So I'm going to open up all of the rooms. Paul, Andy, you'll both be chucked into rooms as well. If you want to switch rooms, just leave rooms, etc., etc., etc. And yeah, may the best
let's just
player win.
Let's do it fast and furious. Let's do 5 minutes. Let's see if we can knock it out in that. If we can't, then we'll crack on.
Okay. Oh yeah. By the way, how long do you want the rooms open for, Paul?
Just 5 minutes.
Awesome. Cool. All right. We'll see everyone. Yeah, we'll see everyone soon. Okay. Is anyone here that didn't get a room assigned to them in Medina? Hey, Paul. I'm not sure. Maybe it looks like, oh, there we go. It looks like Zoom is being a bit slow allocating the students. So we didn't tell you, but there's 1 billion Prussian francs on the line for the person who solved it first.
And Christian's stumping it up. Right. Group 1, I'm going to come to you last. So if we go to group 4, how about someone from group 4 tells me 3 things that they spotted?
Who is in which group?
So group 4, just to give you a little reminder, that's Connor, Gambay, Habib, and Krishna.
Yeah, so the 3 that we found was the in was missing. That's your upcoming sessions.
Yeah.
So the in is missing, and at the rate is replaced with AT. The colors different at VOL. It's also caps, and it's not on the right. So that's 3. And the logo FE towards the end.
Okay.
You got all 12 actually.
Sorry?
Yeah.
You got 12, did you, Chris?
Yes.
So now we'll go to group 3. So group 3, that's Hadil, Jade, Julia, Medina, Matendre, and Vasilis. So go ahead, group 3.
This is ours, and we got quite a couple.
Ooh.
I don't know which one you kind of want. So here we saw that the bar wasn't extended, that this color of the heading doesn't match the button, and this ad became ad.
Yeah, and it's good to mark it up actually. That's because that's the ultimate. That's what the developer needs to sort of start fixing things. Any of the other groups got anything? I think that was quite a lot there. So anybody else got any Anything they spotted that was above and beyond that?
So should we go group 2 then? So that's Abel, Hindre, Kieran, Ross, Sanjay, and Soaif. Anybody from that group? Yeah.
I think that's all of them, because plus the first one, I think that's everything we had.
Yeah. So let me go through the list of things I've got here. There's a stretched logo at the top where the Conservative Party tree and word is stretched. Someone rightly said all the titles are in the wrong color blue. Your session and interact are in larger fonts. The view all font is different. The logo for the interact item is too small. The button is not full width on the same location. There's a pin icon missing from the venue. So there's a pin before Charter 3 and Central 9. There's an at instead of, there's the word at instead of the symbol at. There's a missing line between the announcement and the X. Did the team that did the picture, did you get that one? I can't remember.
We got that one.
Right. Okay. And the tab bar, the icons aren't aligned. Did you get that one? Where's your Miro one? Let me have a little look. Ah, no, you didn't get that one. Did anybody else spot the icons?
Is it like my screen hosting one app?
No, so it's at the bottom bar.
Like 70.
The map icon is about 3 or 4 pixels lower than it is on the other side. It looks, if you see, it's not aligned. Yeah. Okay. Let's go back.
It's a hard one, that one.
That's the thing, is that the devil is in the detail. There's missing shadows throughout. Did you get that on your Miro?
Oh yeah.
No,
you didn't. So there's shadows missing. If you go to
we did. We put no shade here.
Ah, there we go. Sorry, didn't spot that. Sorry. Yeah, so the shadows were missing throughout. And then, sorry, I'm going to have to go back and forth to the screens here. And the announcement items, the fonts were wrong. So I think you got almost everything. I think just that map symbol at the bottom might have slipped by various teams. But if you want to stop sharing that's great. I guess, you know, one thing it's just trying to make sure that it's, if you know, all those little things, each individually is not a massive difference, but altogether it adds up to a bit of a mess. And it's really vital that you get, and at each stage you're nailing and reining in those little creep items. And developers particularly can find it very hard to see and possibly even understand why it's important. Because they're mainly concerned with whether it works. So when I press the button, does it do what it's supposed to do? And the fact that I've made a minor tweak to the design is, well, it's not that important. What we know in modern society, and particularly with mobile devices, is that people want things that look really right. It's a very personal space to your mobile phone. You don't want something that's ugly on there. And it will make it much more usable and much easier to interact with if it's designed well and that design is followed through. Let me go back to my screen share. Let me see if I can get this right. If I'm getting this right, are you seeing the spot the difference slide again now or not? Yep, I can see some people nodding. That's great. Right, let me just get the right. So just going back to that development process, specification to make sure you know exactly what you're building, planning what you're building, executing it in those 2 weekly sprints. making sure you test as you go, and then finally releasing that to the world. And functional spec, developed solution, and all important source code. So that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of the development piece. What I wanted to talk about next was gamification. Is this a term that people have heard before? Certainly there's a nodding Julia there, thank you. A couple of nods there, brilliant. So gamification is something that, it's a really powerful tool to engage and retain users. Gamification can boost engagement by circa 35%, with real impacts on social media sharing, real impacts on content discovery. But you don't have to be a gaming app to apply these processes. They started as things in games, but they apply equally across the whole arena. So you see it in fitness apps that try to turn boring jogging into a race against zombie hordes, productivity apps that pit us against the clock to get us to finish our to-do list, and financial apps are even trying to make paying bills fun. I'm not sure they're necessarily achieving that one. And with so many apps available, an app needs to stick out more than just being a great product. It needs a great user experience. And simple rewards like discount codes or digital badges can be really good motivators for users to complete a task, make a purchase, or share your app. And to find inspiration for your gamification, look at what other people are doing. Look at the apps that you've already got on your device, and think about how you would use gamification to improve those. So a lot of these ideas are borrowed from games originally, hence the name. At the simplest level, you've got points-based systems where you gather points for doing activities. That applies to real world as well as to the digital world. If you look at the likes of Avios points, club card points, it's all about building a balance and trying to separate point value and monetary value slightly. So you don't tend to have, 1 point doesn't equal £1, but rather you tend to have multiples to make it seem like you're earning more. Badges, for those of you that might have been scouts or guides, when you were smaller, we used to collect our badges for doing our tasks, and it was the same principle. Sorry, I've moved on to the wrong slide. Milestones, just setting out tasks for people to achieve, rankings, communities that talk about the product, the use of competitions, the use of mobile apps as a side to other products. So using mobile apps for gamification of other products. So gamification of exercise, for example, and social rewards. So the ability to allow people to have a higher profile. Facebook have introduced it in the form of top fans. So if you comment a lot on a particular page, you get a top fan button badge, and there's these sort of mix of elements, and it's all about first of all driving usage. So it's helping make sure that you explore the product. So quite often you'll see when you join an app or join a program, you'll get some points for doing some very simple tasks at the beginning, like registering your email, referring a friend, filling in some data, opening up and doing a particular task. Those things get you to do a sort of discovery phase. And then beyond that, they look to use gamification to try and drive loyalty and stickiness to a product. This might be, if any of you have used Duolingo, there they use a thing called streaks. So every day that you use the app, your streak gets longer, and then you share. And I've seen people share, you know, this is their, you know, day 100, you know, day 100 and something. Then you see somebody else, they're sharing it's day 400 and something, that they've done it every single day. And then people don't want to break the streak because it's, you know, they don't want to go back to the beginning. So these are tools that are being used in lots of different applications in lots of different ways. Another one is using virtual goods to allow you to buy, to exchange them for virtual goods inside a product. So, for example, some games allow you through usage to earn the ability to get virtual uniforms for your character. Now, there's no intrinsic value to these, but people do strive very hard to achieve them. And so it's a really good way of using around user behavior change. So even if your app is quite dry, you can still do things to help make that more interesting. And examples, you know, in the billing space, in banking app. Sorry, was that a question? By the way, Christian, if there are any questions in the chat, can you shout them out for me?
Will do, will do.
Let me just. So this is a reward badge scheme for a book reader, Kobo, and this uses a variety of badges, and you earn them as you go. So Welcome to Reading Life is just reading a book at all on the system. That gets you that badge. Book Lover, you have to read a certain number of books or like a certain number of books within the system, and then other ones that are grayed out. Like the My Library is building a library, and then you've got some where you can see that they're starting to fill up from the bottom. So Highly Decorated and Scout Leader, they're sort of partially complete. So you start to understand that you're on your way and what you need to do extra. Now this example, you can see the badges. Some other systems have badges that are hidden, so you don't even know how to earn them until you earn them. Foursquare, which was an early social media platform, had this, and there were some badges that you earned by rating venues and interacting, and they were fairly straightforward. But then you got random badges allocated to you, under a sort of surprise and delight type philosophy, whereby if you stayed out late after midnight for 3 nights in a row during the midweek, you earned a special badge. And it was just like, you didn't even know you were ever going to get it. And I think it was called the Dirty Stop Out badge or something. And you know, they just made it really fun and hid these little gems in there. So I think there's ways to make put these little hidden things in, and then they become the sort of things that then get released in PR stories, etc., that then make people go and explore and try and find them. Nike Fuel, an app that people might have used. This is a good example of leaderboards. You know, you versus your friends, you versus people in your area, you versus the rest of the world. How are you doing? How do you rank? Where are you at? And I think you see these in an awful lot of applications, particularly the fitness ones. Some sort of progress display, showing that people have done a certain percentage, how they're doing against their own personal targets, is another example of gamification. And it's really there pitting yourself against yourself. So there's lots of different ways that you can make those interactions. So a few other examples of gamification in practice. This is a to-do list. Is an app called Todoist. It's a productivity app that helps users track everything from major projects to simple household chores. The app uses gamification to promote users to complete their tasks by rewarding them with karma points every time they finish something, and negative karma for missing a deadline. And as users collect more, they unlock new levels from beginner to enlightened, and they can share their karma scores with friends on Facebook, Twitter, Insta, etc. but obviously it has no real value. It doesn't, you could cheat. You could just put tasks in and then cross them off. But it's just putting in a little bit of fun, a little bit of something to make you feel rewarded. This is an Indian education app that uses gamification by allowing students to play games and reward points and challenge each other through quizzes and competitions that are clearly focused on the educational needs. And they compete with other students, motivating each other to work better for results. This works well in driving usage of the app more generally, but also in driving the outcomes. Another one, we all need a bit of motivation to get out of a warm bed on these cold mornings and show up at the gym when they were open. And this is My Fitness app, and this gamifies fitness, and it records things like your personal bests, longest workout, most number of workouts in a week, most number of workouts in a month, and you're constantly pitting yourself against yourself. This one's also quite smart in terms of the technology. It connects to the training equipment, and it also gets access to Samsung Health data, and also I think integrates with the step tracker on the iPhone. So it's compiling all of that data and giving you these targets. So it converts their reward points, as it were, what they call moves, which is the one at the top of the right-hand panel. And it's a sort of unit of energy usage. It's not directly related to calories, etc., but it's their estimation. It ranks therefore your workouts into giving you move points, and it's then about how many move points did you get in a session, in an exercise, in a week, in a month, etc. Starbucks app features a loyalty scheme. This is a more traditional loyalty scheme. It's about collecting your stamps, as it were, to get your free rewards. And there's also rewards of a loyalty program. So there's retention by incentivizing users to come back to the app to redeem the points, and also to try and get them to purchase through the app rather than paying in store, which allows for some savings in terms of process. And this last one, this one is actually, almost all of you will probably have this on your phone, and I suspect many of you have never seen it. If you go into Google Maps and then choose choose your contributions, which is the third item down on the menu bar, you'll then see all of the places that you've reviewed, all of the places that you've visited, and you can earn badges, and you've been earning these badges whether you wanted to or not, whenever you use the app. I can see a few people having a look now to see if they've done it. And these are things, for example, this particular badge is the reviewer badge, and you get, if you post 3 reviews, you get the novice reviewer. If you post 25 reviews, with 5 of the reviews over 200 characters, and get 5 likes of your reviews, then you're an expert reviewer, and so on. If you submit photos and they're seen, then you earn badges and points. What they've actually done there is, behind the scenes, is they created this, and it's aimed really at people who quite enjoy already doing those reviews and submitting photos, to encourage them to do more. They've then put levels around that, but what they actually are doing is training their users so that they do more. But the beauty is that the people who do more enjoy it, and therefore they do more of it. And ultimately, they actually reward those people by allowing them, because they've trained them, to then start making changes on Google Maps. So if you note that somewhere has changed its opening hours, what it says is, we'll look into that and we'll update Google in due course. Well, actually, if you reach a certain level on here on the Google Maps, if you make the change, it goes live automatically. They don't check it, because they know that you've been trained and do it well. And then you get asked to check and authorize other people's changes. So they're crowdsourcing through their point scheme the use people's involvement. So you think about how you can use this, what would broadly be called social engineering, to do it. Now, I say that, you'll spot that this is actually my profile. And at that point in time, I was a level 7 local guide, which required me to have reviewed a great deal of places. I think my pictures have now had 7.8 million views on Google Maps. I am one of those people who have been trained to do it by Google, but it's still quite fun. So have a look.
Paul, we've got a quick question from Krishna. Krishna, would you like to go ahead and mute yourself and ask it?
Yes, thank you. You're mentioning about API. So I was wondering if you have more data storage for gamification and also more multiple APIs, a lot of data. Will it slow down in case of a 3G, 4G? Basically slower network, and how that impacts performance. If it does, how can we improve the performance with a slower internet?
So it does depend how you execute the gamification. Quite a lot of these things are done on server side, so they make little difference in terms of slowness on the device. So the Google Maps one is probably a bad example, but the data is collected in the fitness app if we go back a couple. So in here, the data is collected on the machine I am training on. And all I'm doing using the app is I'm actually logging into the machine, and the treadmill or whatever is then sending data back into my fitness, my wellness backend. The data that's coming from the app is data, for example, like footsteps, or if you're using a fitness watch, maybe data from that. That's actually quite small packages of data. So you can actually minimize the amount of data transferring. And so it really shouldn't be a big issue. The difference for something like the Google one is I'm submitting photos, and that's heavier on usage. And particularly on data usage, and they also now want you to submit video content, because that's a video of somewhere is even more compelling for a review. So that will have data usage. That said, data as a barrier has really come down. So many people are A, on Wi-Fi, or B, just on very high data packages, because it's something that people who use their mobile phone significantly already have acknowledged. I think it's slightly different if you're dealing with data usage in difficult to reach places. So for example, you may want to think about how you handle offline or bad connectivity in your app. So an example might be you've got an app that's to do with engineering repairs on electrical systems. Well, if the field engineer is in the middle of literally a field, even in the UK, they may well have no signal at all. So have they been able to download things and synchronize before they got to the incident? And does it then hold it and then release that data when there's a better connection? And so the elegant use of the data there will not only save battery life because it's not constantly trying to send stuff, but also it'll just be a better user experience, because I won't get frustrated that it's hung at the point where it's trying to upload because it's not recognized it's got a connection, but actually it's like a 2G connection and it's going to take a week to upload this photo.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I've got what I was looking for. Thank you, Paul.
Great. So I mean, what I'd say is have you seen data gamification in apps that you're using, and which ones do you think are doing interesting things? So you're throwing it open to everybody.
Strava, and they have challenges and communities and badges. So yeah. Yeah,
I think the fitness space is one where you see an awful lot of this. Anybody seen it in anything else?
There is also an application for quitting smoking. So it gives you like how many days you've been smoke-free and like the percentage of different things like going back to normal in your body. That's quite good as well.
Yeah, often I've seen those ones, and I say this as an ex-smoker, that they also have things like about how much you've saved.
Yeah,
Try and
definitely.
have mobility. In fact, one of the earliest products that I worked on was an SMS-based reminder to motivate people to give up smoking. But that was like pre-apps, so it was like 1999, before most of you, well, all of you were born. Others, what else? I mean, an example of how it can be quite subtly done is if you go on LinkedIn, there's a profile percentage completeness on the screen that's really annoying because it's not, if it's not, now it depends. Certain people are motivated by this differently. As someone who's a little bit OCD, if it doesn't say 100%, I'm like, right, what haven't I done? What's wrong? What have I not done? But that just visual indicator, it can be very motivational. There is actually some evidence to show that certain of these tools work better for men and women, slightly different ways. If you see Boy Scouts, they're often the ones with their badges all the way down their arm. There seems to be a sort of collecting thing. If you think about train spotting, coin collection, stamp collecting, without wanting to be, show complete sexual bias, there is a propensity for some of those activities to be for more male-dominated. So, what about others? Have you seen it in? Has anybody seen it in any dating apps, for example? Because I'm pretty sure quite a lot of those have some gamification.
Everyone is staying quiet. We don't use dating apps. But a few people in the chat did mention things like game online stores, so Steam, PlayStation, they use a lot, etc., etc. So that's definitely.
It's amazing how often you'll be amazed at when you start looking for it in how many apps you see it. It often can sometimes it's used quite subtly, just at the onboarding stage, to try and get you to look at certain activities and go to certain parts of the app to sort of discovery. But then I think the more interesting one is that long-term usage. And if you're thinking of your idea, think about how, first of all, what user behavior do you want to drive? What is it that you want people to do? So it could be to recommend the app, to share it with a friend. Maybe you add a new feature, you want them to, I use the Revolut app, and they have a vault. So they do quite a lot around making sure that you understand the new features they've added so that you can set up a vault you share with a friend. So it's a savings account. So making people discover things is a really important part of the process. I think I'll skip this bit because we were going to do this too. Let me stop sharing there. Given that everybody's got their own secret ideas, particularly now that Andy's put down a large prizes for everybody, I think the idea of getting people to share ideas at this stage is probably a bit too much. Certainly a few people are shaking their heads. So think about your product and your gamification and what's going to work for you in your particular app. And think about how you change people's behavior, because that's what it's about. What do you want them to do differently? What do you want to make them scatter? Yes, Pokemon Go, as someone's saying. It's still being played. There's one of the people who live in this block still goes out chasing Pokemon every day.
I also just mentioned something, Paul, sort of even kind of, although it's not gamification, it's kind of tying into social media. We've had some great ideas that we've heard within the startups team, which is about growing engagement by sharing things out onto social media, and how that kind of boosts brand awareness for kind of these initial app ideas that we've heard. And it's just thinking that actually, talking about kind of ideas and also things to consider in the pitch, how do you use what you do, or how will your app kind of integrate to potentially allow people to raise awareness of you as a brand, or your app as a potential solution to a problem that they're facing?
Yes, often gamification is used to drive the sharing behavior. Share this on Facebook, earn some extra points. Post this on LinkedIn, get some extra points. Those type of activities and you want to think about what the dynamics are. What do you want? It's the deepening usage, because that will drive adoption and fans, sharing it with other people, and then perhaps a piece around discovery as to how do you get them to find out about new stuff within your product as it develops. Yes, addiction equals profits. I mean, there is a social balance there. I think it's Julia saying there that there's, you've got to get the right balance. If you drive the wrong behavior too hard, then you'll get other interventions. Either people will get annoyed by your product being too naggy, but also you may get parental intervention, or you may just get bad press. Now, some people have made some very smart ways of handling this in the background. Candy Crush and their various variants, they actually mess with the dynamics of the game while you're playing. So they actually work out your user behavior. And so let's describe a standard person who commutes into the office, does some stuff in the office, comes home, and then sits on the sofa and plays some games while watching some TV, not a million miles away from normal behavior. They make the gameplay short in the mornings because they know you're commuting and you want to be snackable. And they make the gameplay longer and harder in the evening because they know you'll stick at it. And they do that in the background on a person by person specification, because obviously people commute at different times, people are in different time zones. It's not straightforward, it's not just on-off piece. They also deliberately make some levels hard for a period of time, because the easiest way to then get past them is to recommend a friend and get through the level by doing that rather than getting through the level. But if you don't do it for a period of time, then they let you through because they don't want to stop you playing the game longer term. So some of the stuff can be very subtle and very arguably controlling in the background, but it does show that you can really use that information you gather about people and their behavior to really tailor your product. And that can be very, very powerful, because done right, it just feels like the product really works for you. It's like people say they don't like advertising. What they mean is they don't like bad advertising. You know, advertising for stuff that you're interested in isn't advertising, it's engaging. So it's putting the right stuff in front of people at the right time. What else have we got in here?
I think Julia's opening up in the chat if anyone wants to read. I think we're going from app development to Jerry Springer pretty quickly. But I suppose on that note, Paul, I suppose one of the things we often hear is about ad revenue and ad generation in apps being maybe kind of the primary source of kind of income in early days. I mean, I think kind of for some of us, kind of what you're likely to get for kind of cost per meal and things like that, what the indicators are. But what about sort of some of the things that people today might want to think about?
I'm going to talk about this a bit next time, but I can cover off some of it now. The monetization within your product is clearly crucial. However, ad revenue on its own is really hard to sustain without it becoming really intrusive for the user. So, and you used to be able to, when you put an app in the App Store, put ads in it and then say, pay to get the ads removed. And you're really not allowed to do that anymore. You have to add more features, more functionality. Now, you might do both at the same time as a sort of cheat, but these days, ad revenue is not a great driver. Now, it's not bad on web. So mobile web and web using ads, display ads. More likely nowadays are partnerships. So you work with a company and they're paying for placements within your application. So you might have the Spotify music charts within your app. or you might have some other brand. You might have a banking app that supports your student chat area because they want to get in front of students. More often now, it's in-app purchase is the route to monetization. And that doesn't always have to be for something sensible, because if you look at Fortnite, you were buying virtual gear for your virtual character that made no difference whatsoever to the gameplay. Joe Wicks launched his fitness app, I think like 2 weeks ago. Took £9 million in the first week. So it's like most online, it's volume that counts. So it's a number of users if you're going for mass market. And don't forget that there's a lot of other ways of monetizing. So you could be selling the product to an organization to put out for their users. Picking Essex as an example, you might approach Essex University and say, would you like to buy a student wellness app to help with mental health? And that's the sort of thing that a student at a university or a students' union might invest in. And if you can make a licensed product that you then give to multiple universities, then that works out very well. Or it might be on a per user basis. So you might have an app that solves a problem for the police force, and you say, well, for every person that uses it, there's a fee, and so therefore they have a number of people who need it in each force. And the good thing about that is you start off with a few small numbers, and those numbers add up very quickly. So what sounds like a value proposition, and I will give away my favorite set of numbers, which is I used to run for Vodafone the horoscope service, and it was 25p a day. Which is not very much. And we had 11,000 users on the service. And that's £1 million a year. And that just, what doesn't, neither does, 25p a day. Okay, it does add up. But if you imagine out of a Vodafone audience of, millions of users, the idea that you could get, 11,000 people on there is like a no-brainer. So actually you can come up with some quite large numbers quite quickly if you're deploying to the masses. But equally, other organizations will pay a lot. We built an application for a mining maintenance company, and that project cost about I think it was about £50,000 to £80,000. They only had 10 people who used that app. But what they did was maintenance on mining equipment that cost $250,000 a day for a day of downtime. They only have to save one day ever, and they've made their money back. So it is all about where it fits. And don't just think apps as consumer. Think about business usage. Think about corporate usage. Think about governmental usage. There's social good. Think about how charities use applications to engage you with their cause or fundraise. There's a lot of different reasons people build a digital solution. I will always default to the word app, but it can be any digital solution.
I think that's. I was going to say it's really interesting because actually one of our graduates who gave a talk to our some EBS students last week, he was actually looking at the business-to-business opportunities based off of the back of kind of COVID and again, we're not saying you have to go out and build the next, Facebook or Instagram. That's really not the case. It's, where do you see a problem that you encounter, or where do you see a connection that can be made that's currently missing? There's lots of new opportunities moving forward. I was asked a couple of weeks ago my opinion on them, and I was thinking travel and tourism post-COVID. There's going to have to be changes in those particular areas. Obviously, healthcare. And sort of med tech as well, and you don't always need expertise in these areas if you can find co-founders who may be able to kind of support the ideas as well. I personally think esports is a massive one. I think that's a huge opportunity in the next 10 years.
There's two esports tournaments venues being built in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, so
venues.
I mean, a few weeks ago, a few sort of things I've seen on various newsletters is that there are tournaments for $250,000, and this is attracting kind of those top level players. And there's certain sort of apps out there that I know sort of are used, but I think kind of it's still really young as a kind of, if we call it a sector in the truest sense, because I think it will be in the future. You know, it's spotting those trends, spotting what's on the rise, and actually saying, well, how could I come in early and be disruptive with that as well?
And the other thing to remember is, just because somebody else is doing it already doesn't mean that you can't make a better version. Because there were lots of taxis before Uber. Yeah, they came along and disrupted it, and they made it different. And there are now other people coming along and disrupting Uber in specialist markets. You know, is there a marketplace model for something that that you see as a, you know, maybe it's a niche? Are there, you know, is there a new way of doing something better because mobile exists? You know, something that already exists in the, I call it the real world, that you can mobilize. And it's coming at it from a different angle. And sometimes I actually did a course at a sixth form college, and the project that we were doing was to look at something for assisting with travel in London. And because all of the people were 16 to 18-year-olds, they came up with ideas that my team would never have come up with, because they were facing unique problems of travel in London as 16 to 18-year-olds. So for example, they get free bus travel, but they pay on the tube. So they don't want to know the quickest way somewhere. They want to know the route by bus, because they've got lots of time. And so they don't mind taking longer, but they don't want to pay for it because they haven't got much cash, because they want to pay, they want to buy something when they get there. One of them did a piece around training on bicycles, because they wanted to ride a bike in central London, but the last time they'd been taught anything was they were at primary school, and they weren't confident. So how did they build confidence about using hire bikes in London? So, you know, you may have a unique perspective on something based on, you know, the fact that you are you know, looking at the world in your particular way, and that might give an opportunity. Conscious that I've sort of come to the end of my content, so I'm very happy to answer any questions, particularly if you've got any sort of coded questions that you can ask me about your idea without giving anything away, to help you start thinking about what you might be pitching in March. Either ask in the chat or just unmute.
Whilst people are having a think, again, sort of knowing some of the faces and knowing some of your ideas, you know, it'd be good for you to start thinking about the next steps. And I think after the final session in 2 weeks' time, you know, I think kind of we already know there's some great ideas out there. You know, there's the chance through this funding to actually kind of help you take it to the next stage, because we recognize how barriers can be perceived. So this is probably the biggest game of poker face I've ever seen. Some people have just not even turned their cameras on because they don't want to be seen to blink at this kind of instance. I think Julia's slowly losing it, talking about unicorns in the chat, and I think kind of might have to send help in her direction in a little while.
There is a question there on costs. So I'm going to give you commercial costs, but these are what we would charge as a large agency dealing with commercial partners. To design an application, so that's the pre-design and design phase, would take between 15 and 20 days of our resource. That doesn't mean 15 and 20 days of time, but rather we will take 15 days of our time, and that time might be spread over a month to 2 months. That phase would cost about £15,000 to £20,000. And then to build an app, if you say that an app is typically a build of around about 4 months, then that would be from, a typical app would be anything from sort of 35 to 60,000 and upwards. To build a game, which we don't do, and we tried it once and it was a very painful experience, and I'm not doing it again. It went horribly wrong. $250,000 plus, otherwise it's going to be rubbish, because they're complicated. They need a lot of scripting, a lot of complexity to make it compelling.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So where would you go about getting finances for this, like moving forward?
So I'm going to try and touch on finance next time, but just give you some headlines now. First of all, I go and talk to the innovation team and go and speak to them about what structures are in place at the university, because there are things in most universities, incubator type environments, which can help with some of that. Okay. Enter a competition, win a prize, get yourself going. That's one. Others are, there's some funding, there's some opportunities to get funding in the UK that are actually quite unique to the UK, called SEIS and EIS, and they are tax breaks for people who invest in early startups.
Right.
And basically, that's the bet. If you're raising some money, those vehicles really incentivize people to put money in, because they basically get some of their money back straight away from the government as a tax discount. Yeah. So if I put £1 into your business, I'd get 40p back from the government the next day. So it's only cost me 60p to put £1 in.
Yeah. So did you say you're going to be touching more on this next week?
A little bit more on this, subject to time next one.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
But there are a number of funding avenues available. And even if I don't manage to cover it all next time, because I've got Jake coming in to do this piece around the software and what you might be using, we can certainly make the slides available, which got the notes. But there is, for example, there is a company that we do some work with, and they specialize in taking app ideas and incubating them and helping them raise funds and building them, because that's their sole reason for existence.
If I can just sort of step into sort of with what Paul said as well about the funding we have available. Now, I always kind of caveat this with saying we are always limited, but we do have different opportunities. One of our graduate businesses, the university hasn't actually invested £50,000 into. Yes, everyone starts nodding the moment I say big numbers. But that's an example of how they have worked with us as a team. They have demonstrated they're ready to pitch for different amounts of funding. You know, if you come to us having never worked with us and say we need £30,000, you know, to look at how we can kind of build this app, we're most likely going to sit there and say, well, where have you been whilst you've been doing all of this? You know, we're not just here to fund you, because there's a lot of other things. You know, the app is an aspect of the business, but you need to build the business around the app. You know, it doesn't just work to have something can go to market. And we often talk about product market fit. We often talk about flipping it and saying, well, find where the market is and then build a product that suits it. Otherwise, you're trying to make a square peg fit a round hole, and it doesn't work. Whereas the people we've worked with, I've said sort of £50,000 in one company, we've invested £30,000 in another graduate company. It's about demonstrating consistent progress. You know, you have to work with us regularly, because the types of funding we make available at a certain level, it is, you know, it sounds elitist, and it is. It's invite only, because we have to know that you're ready to take on that level of funding and to use it wisely. And that's why smaller programs and the sort of funding that we've got available through this is about you demonstrating to us how it would be a good investment for the university. And that's kind of, when you're going to investors, that's what they're looking for as well. They're looking for it to be a wise investment. No alpaca farms. Julia, are you okay? But I think Julia did kind of ask a question about, again, outsourcing development abroad. You know, yes, you know, people do that. It comes with its own risks. And
my company, we have all our design and front of house stuff in London, and I have a development team in Mumbai. So we have a separate part of the business that's Mumbai, and they do the sort of core coding. But the risk of outsourcing is you need to know exactly what you're building, and actually the vast majority of people don't. What you have is the core idea, and you then need a process of thinking it through. And part of the prize in this particular case is time from my team to help you with that process and thinking it through. And as Andy rightly says, an app in itself is not a business. You need all the rest of the numbers around that. You need to know what your modeling is, what your cash flow is, your corporate structures, and everything else that goes with running a business. We sometimes get clients coming to us, and it's like, particularly maybe sort of 4 or 5 years ago, where they'd sort of seen loads of apps boom, and they'd go, well, we want an app for our business, and they sort of saw it as magic dust to sprinkle on and make things work. And it's like, if you don't have an underlying business that works, then having an app for it isn't going to fix it. You know, the idea needs to work as standalone. If it happens to be an app, great. If it happens to be a website, great. If it happens to be print, great. And actually, even to do an app, you'll probably have to use print. You know, how are you going to get people to discover your stuff? This is not, you know, 2009 when you put an app in the app store and there's so few apps in there that people will find it. You know, your app will never make the charts unless you really drive it hard. And you need to think about that marketing model. You know, I'm talking about what the app costs. What I'm talking, for whatever the app development is, you can probably double it for the marketing budget if you're going to make it work.
I've got another question.
Yep.
So can you tell us what you're actually specifically looking for in the presentation, or is that giving too much away?
Well, it's Andy's competition, so I don't know.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so I mean, what we're looking for is, you know, a combination of a good business case. So, you know, we often talk about why you want to do something. So why is this kind of idea that you've got important to you? What will it lead to, and how will you do or achieve the outcomes that you're looking to? There has to be a realistic expectation around things like market research. If you are able to do that beforehand, again, you know, and I always say, don't tell me you've got a good idea, tell me 100 strangers have told you it's a good idea. Because subjectivity is the worst approach to take to business sometimes. We talk about trusting your gut, but you also need to have research-informed decision-making processes behind what you do. Alongside that, you know, we're also kind of looking for realistic kind of explanation as to what the steps are going to be. You know, what are you going to do out of if you were successful? And as sort of Paul's mentioned, you know, we're going to be joined next week as well, and we're going to be looking for not a fully workable, but we'd like to see kind of some examples of how the app may actually work, and you know, whether or not that's done through kind of how you put a PowerPoint sort of presentation together to demonstrate that. We've mentioned InVision before. There are other kind of tools out there. You know, we want it to be a combination of kind of a business pitch and an introduction to a demonstration. A clickable mock-up, yeah, you know, wireframes. You can choose something to demonstrate to us where you are at with the development. We're not looking for a finished idea. That would be kind of the wrong approach. What we're looking for is opportunity to explore further, because also, depending on who you read, if you've ever read The Lean Startup or anything like that, it's about fail fast, fail cheap. And it's not done in a negative way. It's to find what's going to work and what's not going to work. And it's more important to find what's not going to work at as early a stage as possible than it is to spend a lot of time and then discover actually, you know, you've invested huge amounts of money, time, effort, but it comes back to what I said, there was no market. And that's the biggest reason why businesses fail and why apps don't get taken up. It's a combination of there being no appetite and there not being enough focus on building the business around it. So we're looking for a well-rounded presentation. You don't have to have every step laid out as to what you're going to do next, but we want to see enough consideration and enough areas to say that this isn't just a spur of the moment thing. This isn't just opportunistic. This is actually saying there is thought in this. Here's the sort of proof. Here's what we're looking to do. This, and again, this is what it could look like, not, you know, what it will do, but this might be kind of some basic features or functionality within it.
So one thing to think about, and this is, I mean, generally, but specifically for apps, apps that do well tend to do one thing really well. They're quite laser focused. If you look at the apps on your phone, they tend to be in one area. They don't tend to try and do everything. They're not the internet. So think about what they do. Now, some of the apps may have creeped since they launched, but that's because they've now got an audience. But you know, what was Uber about at the beginning? It was about booking a taxi, quick as you possibly could, as easily as possible. Now they've added lots of extra bits. But again, at the beginning, it just does that. Take the BBC app. They have one app for sports and one app for news because they're different. Actually, underlying them, they're the same tech. They're the same engine. But users want, the user that wants sports does not want general news, and vice versa. So what is your laser focused idea? And you've got 5 minutes to pitch it, so keep laser focused. It's cram as much, you're going to practice that explanation, get us to the point of understanding what it does quickly, so you can then convince us that that is a good idea. And if it, use different media to get, if you've got pictures and words, you don't need to tell us what's on the slide, because we're going to be reading that while you're saying something else. So now you've doubled the input.
Question in the chat. If the app is based on the data from the existing websites and would eventually need to use their APIs.
So it does depend on what you're doing with their data. But if you go down the sort of screen scraping route, which some apps, I know some people have used in the past to gather data, the issue can be that they change stuff and block it. So that is long-term doesn't have a success. The question will be whether they have an API for the data, and whether at this stage, whether they're going to be willing to share it. What I'd say is work out your idea, work out if there is anywhere else to get that data. And then the question is, are you enhancing their product or competing? Because if you're competing, they're never going to give you the data. But there's lots of open data out there, don't forget. There's a project called Open Data London, which is loads and loads of data sets of stuff in London for everything from, that's where all the bus and train and tube movements come from, that all the apps feature. So there's a view that will just make that data available, and then other people will do something interesting with it. So, there's some interesting mashups of data. A good example of someone who's mashing up data is all of the estate agency apps, all the Zooplas and Rightmove, etc. You go onto the bit about a location and it pulls up data from loads of different sources for that postcode and tells you what the crime rate is, what the nearest school is, what their Ofsted rating is. That's not all in their back end. That's coming from lots of different systems. So that, pulling data in from lots of places can be a very interesting way of making something that is better than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. And an example, I used to work at University of Portsmouth. We had the City Council give us some of their open source data around social isolation in the city, and then people overlapped information available around the bus routes and everything to determine whether or not certain communities were being served and able to lift themselves out of being socially isolated. And they ended up securing a small contract between First Bus and Portsmouth City Council to use that data to start doing that. So again, access to these things doesn't necessarily have to come at a cost. It can be available with what's already existing.
So a question about voice tech. So voice technology, I'm not going to say the name of the Amazon robot voice person, because otherwise the one in the other side of the room will go off. But whether it be that or Google Voice, it's definitely got a place. The challenge is the interface, which is both amazing, but also really limiting. Try and order a pizza by voice and all the different options you need to go through versus clicking on a menu. So some things are good and some things are bad, and it really depends what it is that you're going to put through that process. Often what's talked about now at the moment is headless CMS, so a headless content management system. So you have all of the content in a system, and then you have different front ends for it. So you can change the front end. So you can have voice sat on top of it. You can have an app. You can have a website. But all the source of the data is in one place. And then it's just about how it's used and how it's made available. But voice-based product, very interesting area. Andy, one for you, whether it can be, we've talked a lot, I've talked a lot about mobile apps. I actually switch between the language, meaning mobile apps, mobile web, and web apps. And I'm assuming that, Andy, for this, it's sort of, is it open?
Yeah, it is open. Again, it's sort of, again, demonstrating the concept behind it.
I have a question. The pitch amount, should it be strictly used for developing an MVP, or can it, some of it could be spread to doing primary research and getting it tested as well?
So part of this will include some support from Paul's company, and then the microfinance grant that you would receive, which is supported by Santander, is for you to determine the best next steps. So again, something to think about is in your pitch, can you demonstrate to us what that funding might be used for in the next stages of development? So is it about going to actually kind of be in a position where you may be able to demonstrate something, or do you need to advance your kind of initial prototype or MVP, you know, just to a point where you can then go out to user testing? It's something to consider how you will. So there's £3,000 cash, and the kind of the equivalent for £4,500 support that Paul and his company and his team will be supporting in terms of helping you take the idea that you present and doing some development work on that as well. And by development, I don't mean technical development. I mean, as in, you know, how do you take the idea and move it forward?
So the bit that we think is relevant, but it'll be down to the individual, we'll tailor it to the individual ideas, is effectively putting the idea through our pre-design process, which looks at questioning the idea, testing the idea with you, working out what the initial shape of the application might be, or the web solution, working out some initial pages, doing perhaps a top level wireframe, but getting you, and if you've got some wireframe there, then what we'll do is we'll help you enhance that and make that more robust so that it stands up to proper scrutiny. Because, and I'm not, you know, demeaning anybody's abilities here, but there will be holes in what people do. If I do an idea and I go to my team, they'll enhance it and they'll make it a lot more robust, because they, you know, we've thought about that detail time and time again. But we'll tailor it to the needs, and it's basically a number of days of resource that we can then deploy as flexibly as possible.
Thank you.